Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
British motorists may have to get an international driving permit to drive on the continent if no deal is reached in the Brexit negotiations before next March. The warning comes in papers published by the government to help businesses and consumers plan for life outside the EU. And there's no guarantee that free mobile phone roaming in the EU will remain the same either. The Prime Minister has been holding a cabinet meeting to discuss the latest preparations, as our political editor Laura Kunsberg reports.
Sending a message across the continent, making a call, hiring a car. If there's no deal between the UK and the EU, free and easy becomes costly and hard. The Brexit Secretary hopes the government has it under control.
We would face short-term risks and short-term disruption, but what we need to have in place, and what I think people expect us to have in place, is a set of plans and proposals and the readiness amongst our institutional capacity, the staff in government, to manage those risks, avoid them where possible, or mitigate them. And that's what we're confident now we've got.
No deal would mean a lot of hassle and potentially cost for a lot of people. There's no guarantee you'd be able to use your mobile abroad without huge bills, even though the government says they would cap roaming charges. If you're on the road in Europe, you might need to get an international driving licence. And if you want to go to the continent at all, you might need to make sure you have 6 months left on your passport, or you might not be able to travel at all. The Brexit Secretary presented those no-deal plans to his colleagues this morning. He didn't emerge for 3.5 hours. A flavour of how much there is to worry about.
What today's meeting was about is making sure we're prepared for all eventualities, and it was very successful.
The Cabinet afterwards striving to find reasons to be cheerful.
We're working towards a good deal and we expect to get one.
The Bank of England governor slipping out the back after taking part too. He and other governments know no deal would be much more than holiday hassles. The French foreign minister said planes could be grounded, trains not able to go.
If we do nothing, and if we reach no agreement, this is what would happen.
And even without a deal, we'd still have to pay.
Not a penny more than our strict legal obligations, but what that wouldn't be is the sum or the phased approach to paying the financial settlement set out in the withdrawal agreement, which didn't then get signed.
But just as the government has been clear with the public about the kind of figure they expect to pay if there is a deal, somewhere just under 40 billion, can you do the same thing and tell the public roughly what we might expect to pay if there isn't a deal?
I'm not going to put a number on a figure in it.
But for our viewers, why can you tell them how much we would pay if there is a deal, when we don't know the substance of the deal, but you can't tell them how much it would be if there isn't a deal?
Well, even in relation to, as I said, we'd pay our strict legal obligations, we'd follow our strict legal obligations. Translating that into a quantum, a sum, actually might need to go to arbitration.
Can you see there being a deal if the EU doesn't somehow modify its position on Northern Ireland?
We can't see any outcome that threatens the territorial, economical, constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom. We, through our proposals, have shown the ambition and the pragmatism. If the EU match us, if they meet us halfway now, we do the deal.
And do you expect them, therefore, to shift their language, their attitude on Northern Ireland? Sounds like you do.
Oh, I think there'll have to be a shift across the board in the EU's approach, and they're going to have to meet us halfway.
Labour says no deal would be a crisis of the Tories' own making. Unlikely perhaps, but a journey few want to make.
And today's plans are not the last of the government's no-deal scenarios. The consequences, at least in the short term, could be pretty drastic. And no deal right now, it's important to say, is not what the government is aiming for. Most people in Westminster think that there will be an arrangement of some sorts. But there are two ways that it might happen. If the Prime Minister is unable to meet the European Union halfway in the negotiations, the talks could fail. Or it could be she comes back with her deal and brings it to the House of Parliament, and a majority of MPs decide to reject what she puts on the table. Now again, that is not the most likely outcome, is the consensus round here. But so much is febrile in Westminster at the moment. There is so much turmoil that the government can't be sure they'll be able to keep the lid on Pandora's box.
Laura Kunsberg in Westminster, thank you.
A tranche of papers detailing what would happen in the event of a no-deal Brexit have been published by the government today. They encompass everything from driving licence regulations and phone roaming charges to extra safety certificates for UK manufactured goods. Our political editor Gary Gibbon is in Westminster now. Gary, what do these documents tell us?
Well, amongst the problems they've fleshed up are that it could be, if we crash out without a deal, that you might need more than 6 months to run on your passport to be allowed into an EU country. It could be that if you're driving into an EU country, you might need a separate international driving licence, not just a British one. Amongst other ones, you could, if you currently have surcharge-free mobile roaming charges, you might find that those aren't there. There are also, as you say, an awful lot of implications for business, extra forms that need to be filled in. What the CBI said felt like a sledgehammer of regulation, as you have to check whether you conform to the EU in a way that you didn't have to in the old days. Interestingly, there seem to be more problems in this, the second tranche of technical notices, than there were in the first, and I understand there are probably even more problems flagged up in the third tranche still to come later this month. That looks at issues like aviation, potentially, agriculture, pet passports, I'm told, makes a pretty rocky reading, and UK citizens' rights. The whole idea here was very much really came from the pro-Brexit wing of the government. They were saying if Britain looks as though it knows what it's doing over no deal, that could reduce some of the fear of that and make it look plausible when Britain says it might walk away from the Brexit negotiating table. But pro-Remain forces in the government think all this stuff is actually working to their benefit and making no deal look pretty scary.
And Gary, what about Dominic Raab's threat on the Brexit divorce bill?
Yes, he's saying that Britain won't necessarily, if there's no deal, pay up exactly as the EU expects. The Prime Minister alluded to this yesterday. He spelt it out a little bit more today. Some forces in government saying that might even include not paying the money for the transition. Well, the EU thinks even if we're not getting the transition, we're liable for that because it's money we signed up to. I understand what Dominic Raab is thinking of is how there could be plenty of scope for lawyerly wrangles over exactly when individual bills fall due, and that could mean the EU doesn't necessarily get the money when they want it.
Gary, thank you, at Westminster.
Away from its continuing diplomatic standoff with Russia, the government made another attempt to explain the dangers of a no-deal Brexit today. It published more information about the possible consequences, including how travel in Europe could get both more costly and more complicated. The Governor of the Bank of England also warned the Cabinet of a possible huge drop in house prices. Ministers say the Chequers plan remains their basis for avoiding all of that and getting a good deal. But speaking to ITV News, the Brexit Secretary failed to name one backbench Tory MP who supported it.
A special cabinet meeting to make contingency plans just in case, whisper it softly, we crash out of the EU on the 29th of March next year without a deal.
Busy times.
I asked the Brexit Secretary quite how bad a no-deal Brexit could be.
No tears, no tantrums, just business.
Ralph Spieth, the boss of Jaguar, says no deal means his plants would have to close for a period. Some of your colleagues have said to me that they think if there is no deal, we would have lorries parked all the way up to the M25. This is scary stuff.
There's no doubt in the no-deal scenario there will be significant risks and there will be short-term disruption. And that's why Cabinet met today, to make sure we've got the plans in place to manage, avoid or mitigate the risks. And of course some of it depends...
Some of that will happen though, won't it, in a worst-case scenario?
Look, we will cater and plan for all scenarios, but in the worst-case scenario there will be some short-term disruption.
And a series of technical papers issued by the government highlighted that exiting the UK without agreement could hoist on us a series of irksome costs and chores. There could be an end to free roaming on mobile phones in Europe, but the government would cap data charges at £45 a month. We may have to buy an international driving permit to drive in Europe. And there's a warning to renew passports that are only 6 months or less from their expiry date, because otherwise we may not be let into the European Union.
Well, I think we need to be clear why we're all talking about no deal. We're only talking about no deal because the Prime Minister cannot get agreement from her own party about the negotiations. In ordinary circumstances, with weeks to go, we'd be closing the gap with the EU. This Prime Minister can't do that because her own party won't let her.
But Dominic Raab says he hopes no deal won't happen, that the Prime Minister's Chequers Brexit plan stands a good chance of being agreed.
Could you name a single EU leader or a member of your own backbenchers who positively likes the Chequers plan?
Well, we've had a range of people.
Go on, name somebody.
Well, so for example, the Polish foreign minister, the Danish finance minister, Angela Merkel actually welcomed the Chequers proposals when they originally came out. I'm not going to give in to the professional pessimists who only pick out
I'm not
the
trying to be
negative
pessimist.
quotes.
I'm trying to give you an opportunity to tell us.
Well, I've just given you three.
Give me a probability that Chequers will be the basis of an agreement.
Well, I'm confident that if the ambition and the pragmatism that we've shown is matched, we get a deal. But I'm not going to start. I'm not a gambling man. I'm not going to start putting odds on it.
But, fearing the worst, the PM asked the Governor of the Bank of England to attend Cabinet to tell ministers how he'd protect our prosperity just in case it's no deal.
Robert, what lies behind those serious words, as you put it, that he had to say on house prices?
So, Governor of the Bank of England is there because plainly, if there's a chaotic no deal, that will have economic consequences. Very unusual, it has to be said, for the governor to be at a cabinet meeting. And the news that he delivered was profoundly shocking to many around the table because he said, unlike August 2000, or, the summer of 2016 after the Brexit vote, once we leave the European Union, if it were in a chaotic fashion, he says the shock to the productive capacity of the economy would be so great that there would be almost nothing the Bank of England could do to keep things moving again. So unemployment would rise, there would be a sharp fall in economic growth, and house prices would fall. And actually, he also warned of a tumbling pound, which would lead to rising inflation. So the worst of all possible outcomes. Now, as it happens, he also said that were she to get a Brexit deal, Chequers deal, excuse me, things wouldn't be nearly as bad as that. In fact, he actually says that the Bank of England would upgrade their forecast. But this was a cabinet to discuss what they could do to protect the UK in the event of no deal. And he basically said, for the stuff that really matters, there's almost nothing we could do. Devastating.
And on the politics of it, your interviewee, Dominic Raab, off to see Michel Barnier again tomorrow. He couldn't name a single backbencher to you. Is he speaking on behalf of a more or less united Tory party tonight?
Let's be clear, his position has been weakened fundamentally in two ways. First of all, the governor's intervention means that when he goes to see Brussels, when he goes to see Barnier and says, look, we could walk away, Barnier is no longer going to believe him at all because the governor has just said to the whole of the British nation, effectively, it would be a catastrophe. So they won't believe we can walk away. Secondly, and terribly importantly, today we saw George Freeman on the left of the Tory party saying that he basically thinks the Prime Minister's time is up once we're out of the European Union. The support for the Prime Minister is eking away day by day.
Robert, thank you.
What happens to our mobile phone chargers, our passports and our driving licence in the event of a no-deal Brexit? Today, the government released its second slew of papers on the practical consequences of leaving the EU without a deal. Everything from vehicle emissions to labelling products to the impact of leaving the EU's satellite and space programmes. Maybe these are finally the hard and fast kind of things that people really want to know about. Meanwhile, the newly extended Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, reiterated to the Cabinet his warning that in a worst-case scenario, house prices could fall by 35%. We'll explore that in a minute with our political editor, but first here's our business editor, Helen Thomas's interpretation of that flurry of papers.
When you're setting out on a journey, best to check you have everything you need. Documents, essential provisions, a backup plan in case anything goes wrong. Still, it's easy to go awry. Time to draft in some help and focus on the navigating. The government has released another set of papers about what no-deal Brexit in March would mean. Some of the signposts point to continuity, guarantees for EU funding, commitment to recognise certain European standards or permits for a limited time. But still, there was plenty of detail on offer about potential disruption for consumers and businesses. There are obstacles up ahead for drivers. You may need an international driving permit as well as your licence to drive or hire a car in the EU. These cost £5.50 and are available from the post office. But there are two different types. So driving in Ireland, Spain, Malta or Cyprus would require a different permit to elsewhere. And there are still plenty of questions for other drivers, the ones in the trucks ferrying food and goods in and out of the country.
We were expecting to hear far more about the implications of both permits to access Europe and access into Europe, but also the issue of customs and border and the controls around that. And again, we've had no clarity, no detail, and that's a massive issue for an industry that's trying to plan for Brexit.
But there were new considerations for holidaymakers headed abroad. Travelling to the EU could require at least 6 months left on your passport, and once there, making calls without expensive roaming charges would no longer be guaranteed. But there would still be a cap on data usage, and some big operators have said they have no plans to reintroduce charges. Businesses trading with Europe could face more serious congestion. Goods in certain sectors could need to be retested in Europe to check they meet required standards. Personal data could flow from the UK to the EU, but not necessarily back again. And the list went on, with regulatory changes for vehicle manufacturers, broadcasters, chemicals makers and shipping companies. We went to look for some expert advice. Joe, maybe you can help with this. What does this actually tell us about businesses in a no-deal Brexit?
So we started to see what friction is likely to mean. We've heard a lot about it, wanting frictionless trade with the EU, but this starts to show what that really looks like if there's a no deal, the new certificates that will be required, new licensing, new contracts for transferring data, and lots of this will come with a price tag, so possibly quite pricey implications for some businesses.
Then there were insolvency proceedings, family law, and, of course, the UK's possible no-deal future outside the EU's space programmes. The government remains confident it will get a deal. Still, there is an awful lot of backup planning for this particular journey.
Helen Thomas-Well, Nick Watt, our political editor, is here. Tell us about this intervention from Mark Carney. 35% drop in in house prices potentially.
That's right. So it was the no-deal Brexit cabinet today, and Mark Carney, as you say, pretty punchy intervention, says in the worst-case scenario, so this is no deal and no transition, he said, as you said, that house prices would fall by 35% over 3 years. Now, he said something similar on the Today programme in August, but that was more about how the bank had done stress tests for property prices dropping by a third. What this was saying is this is what would happen in the worst-case scenario, because sterling would plunge, interest rates would go up, and there would be a knock-on effect then on mortgage rates. Interestingly, he said in those circumstances the bank would not be able to do what it did in the months after the Brexit referendum, which was to cut interest rates, because there would be a fear of that then stoking inflation. A little bit of good news for Theresa May. The governor did say that if she gets her Chequers deal through, then the economy would perform better than the bank is assuming the UK will after Brexit, because they didn't know about that when they did their last assumptions.
So in the totality of that, how did it go down?
Well, Priti Patel, the former Brexit cabinet minister, she's already been out. She's been quoting Peter Shaw, the late great Labour Eurosceptic, talking about fear, fear, fear. That is what they will use. I understand that Theresa May will not be amused by this leak from the cabinet. But interestingly, on this day of this no-deal Brexit cabinet, we have divisions out in the open. Philip Hammond will probably be very pleased that this warning's out there, because he wants us to know about no deal. Dominic Raab, the Brexit secretary, is saying possible countervailing opportunities in a no-deal Brexit.
Nick, thanks very much indeed.
I've been getting